Well, good evening and welcome to Nashville. I'm Alan Jackson. It's a new day in Washington, and the new administration is already setting a record pace for the year ahead. In just the first few days, President Trump has started as much as some new administrations accomplish in their first few months. He's moved back to the Oval Office with a mountain of issues on his desk, and the issue he said was most important to him on Inauguration Day is the open border and the multitude of problems that have come with it. Well, Border Czar Tom Homan has begun mass deportations of people who are here illegally. There's a major tax bill which needs to get approved, or there'll be a $4 trillion tax increase next year. Trump has already promised no tax on tips or Social Security. We'll see. 3 hostages were released, but many more are held, both Americans and Israelis. President Trump brought attention to the hostages, including their parents, former hostage Noah Argamani and relatives of Israeli hostages, and told them, "We never stopped praying for you." Trump's mentioned the Panama Canal in Greenland, representing security and financial issues for all of us. California, they're still in crisis. No water, money spent on DEI and woke policies, billions lost, and there's people who are still homeless. Trump has signed around 100 executive orders overturning Biden rules. Well, there's something powerful about seeing our national leaders gathered inside the rotunda of the Capitol building. We see paintings of similar events from across America's history. And as we watch the inauguration, it was a powerful reminder of our responsibility to carry freedom to the generations ahead of us. It was also a ceremony that honored our heritage, not just our American heritage, but the Judeo-Christian roots of our nation. The prayers that were offered, the songs that were sung, the truth that was told. It really did feel like turning a page to a new and better chapter for our nation. Well, tonight we're going to dive deep into the transformative political landscape following the November election. Joining us is Alex Marlow. He's the editor-in-chief of Breitbart News and a leading voice in conservative media. Alex, welcome back to our program.
Pastor, it's always great to see you, especially in such a joyous week.
Absolutely. Well, it's a clear agenda of personal and international safety, a more robust economy and less government waste, and far less government regulations. I would think that every American would choose those priorities. Does that seem right to you?
Absolutely, it does. And something that I was really struck by with the president's inaugural address yesterday, which was absolutely fantastic, pitch perfect in many ways. But the thing that I liked the most was there were so many concrete examples of policies. And these weren't policies that you always associate with Republicans necessarily or Democrats per se. It was really just sort of things that are unifying. We're talking about ending the wokeness in our military. We're talking about securing the border. We're talking about tapping our energy resources. We're talking about getting out of unnecessary wars. These are unifying themes and trying to bring America back to our conservative Judeo-Christian roots as best we can and as fast as we can to end this sort of woke nightmare that we've been in. He's the exact guy to do it. He's fearless, and it feels like a whole new guy in a good way.
Well, by all accounts, the hostage release only happened when President Trump threatened full force against Hamas. But getting all the hostages out is going to take a bit of time. History makes it clear that you can't negotiate with evil because evil doesn't play fair. That's why we call it evil. When you look at the horrendous events that took place on October 7th, Hamas and its agenda can only be described as evil. So what's your opinion of the Israeli-Hamas ceasefire? How do you think President Trump's support of Israel will impact what's happening there now?
Yeah, I'm very positive on it. And I'll tell you that Israelis don't all love it, particularly those who I think see eye to eye with us politically, people who are on the conservative side of the spectrum, because they would like to see Hamas completely decimated and they would like to see all the hostages come home right away. But the bottom line is that with Joe Biden, a weak U.S. president in power, there was never going to be a ceasefire because there was never going to be a point where either side thought that, okay, we can wrap this thing up and see where it goes from here. Netanyahu, I'm sure, wished he got more out of the deal, but he knows he's got the confidence of Donald Trump, and he knows that Donald Trump will be there so that he has the ability to continue to push back against the forces that wish to do Israel harm. Of course, we're talking about Hamas, but also Hezbollah, Iran, Qatar, others. So he didn't need to necessarily get everything he wanted right away, and we can start the healing process in sort of a staged or phased way. So Trump gets all the credit. I think it's a very good deal, imperfect, but very good. And I have high hopes that it's going to be a great 4 years for not just America, but for Israel as well.
Well, on the issue of our safety in this country, the border czar has begun his work, but this is going to take years, isn't it, to find, round up, and evict not just the known criminals, but the terrorists who the FBI lost track of when they poured through the open borders. Trump says he's taking immediate action. Listen to this.
All illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came. We will reinstate my Remain in Mexico policy.
Well, at least one big city mayor has pushed back on Tom Homan's efforts. How can anyone defend letting criminals and terrorists just roam free?
So they can't, but I feel like this has been taken as gospel truth by the left for so long. I live just north of Los Angeles. I grew up in Los Angeles. And illegal aliens were taken as a given. It was just assumed that we're supposed to leave our border open. It wasn't even discussed really until Donald Trump came down that escalator, really, to be honest, a couple of years prior when we at Breitbart started covering this as a real crisis in this country, our open border. But for decades, for a very long time, the politicians on both sides of the aisle did not take our open border seriously. It's only become fashionable to talk about it within the last decade, and Trump gets a lot of the credit for that. So we have to coach people up. We have to teach them. They really have to unlearn these ridiculous opinions that they've had, that it is humane to have an open border. It's completely inhumane. It leads to the thriving cartel industry where they're smuggling humans and drugs and potentially guns and weaponry, bad people from all over the world coming up through our porous border and doing harm to American cities, particularly with the drug trade as well as crime. They have accepted this, and now they have to admit to themselves that they were wrong. They were wrong for a very long time, and a lot of people died because they were wrong. That's going to be tough to do. So it's not going to happen overnight, but we've started in a major way in the last 24 hours.
Well, it was hard to miss the digital titan standing right behind President Trump's family at the inaugural. Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Google, and there were others. Could that be a sign of a better future between business and Washington? You know, the progressives are claiming that the oligarchs have assembled to complete a takeover. It strikes me as ironic that those same people were justice warriors when they were working for Biden. How do you understand the realignment?
Yeah, it's interesting because all of these companies were very supportive of Democrat policies until 20 minutes ago. So now all of a sudden they're concerned about the oligarchy. When it was this group, not to mention Wall Street and Hollywood and the establishment media and the George Soroses of the world, all funding Democrat policies. Laurene Powell Jobs, who's been the star of a lot of my research, who inherited all her wealth from Steve Jobs when she became his widow, she got all her money from Disney and Apple, and then she funds every left-wing cause you can think of and is best friends with Kamala Harris. We live in an oligarchy, at least until November the 5th, because the Democrats are part of an oligarchic class. But I will tell you, there was a surreal and wonderful moment that took place just this morning as we're recording this, where Trump brought these tech titans to church. He brought them to a prayer breakfast, and he's having them sit there and pray and think about God. These are the most godless people on the planet. I can't speak to all of them individually, but as a culture, the tech class in this country is the most godless class of people we have. And that Trump is bringing them to a prayer breakfast, I think is a massive cultural moment. And I don't trust them. They need to prove themselves for a very long time. But I certainly prefer the way things are today than they were a few months ago.
Yeah, I think Reagan's mantra of trust but verify is appropriate. Well, we'll have more with Alex Marlow in just a moment. There's so much to talk about right now. You can send in an email if you want to share some thoughts of your own. We'll read them all and answer many of them at the end of each program. The address is comments@alanjacksonnow.com. We're back now with the editor-in-chief of Breitbart News, Alex Marlow. At Trump's swearing in, one member of Congress said, "The power of the people in this building comes from the people in this country." Well, the people did speak, and they made clear they wanted big change. Nevertheless, former President Biden left office by pardoning thousands of people with illegal drug convictions. He also pardoned the January 6th investigative committee, including Liz Cheney. And then he pardoned Anthony Fauci, even though we've learned over time that it was Fauci's gain of function testing that led to the COVID outbreak. More than 7 million people have died from COVID, and Fauci's now free to collect his government pension of well over $400,000 a year without fear of any consequences. Is that the legacy Joe Biden wanted to leave? 7 million dead and no apology and no recourse? Seems like an odd legacy to me. Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a terrible legacy. It's really interesting how Biden's dream was to have a legacy. I wrote a book about Joe Biden. I studied him for longer than any person should, but hey, he lost, so maybe it was a good thing. I spent all that time. But he didn't really just want to be president. He always wanted to be president, but he thought of himself as even larger than that. And it was his intention to pass on his legacy to an heir. It was originally going to be his son, Beau, who passed away of cancer about a decade ago. And so that was a very tragic loss for him. And then now the fact that Trump won and erased so much of Joe Biden's legacy with the stroke of a pen within the first day or two, we're going to see a guy who is going to be remembered in history largely for the inflation and for being the guy who kept Trump's seat warm for 4 years. And these pardons are truly disgraceful. To announce that your entire family could have committed all number of crimes for a 10-year window and will never be held accountable for any of them, and that there's not a single one that you deem worthy of being investigated or having any accountability, is bad. But all of these other pardons that he gave, Dr. Fauci, he didn't just fund that gain of function research. He didn't just lie to us about the masks. He didn't just tell us that we were allowed to go to Black Lives Matter riots, but we weren't allowed to comfort our loved ones as they were dying alone in a hospital. He wasn't just responsible for those policies. He funded the gain of function research at the Wuhan lab and then lied about it in a testimony right to Rand Paul's face, and Rand Paul busted him on it. Clearly that was illegal, and that's why he's getting pardoned. It's not some sort of a joke. He did something illegal. Liz Cheney clearly tampered with witnesses and destroyed records. That's why she's getting a pardon. General Milley clearly had off-the-book conversations with officials, probably Chinese officials. I'm certain at this point now that confidential information was shared, or else he wouldn't have needed a pardon. These are very important things to reflect on, because it's not just Biden playing defense for his friends. This is admission of criminal guilt for bad people who are running this country.
It seemed particularly troubling to me that he issued pardons for his family. His brother James Biden and his wife, as well as Frances Biden and his sister, Valerie and her husband. He did it with less than 20 minutes to go as president. He'd already pardoned Hunter for crimes that may have been committed across an 11-year window of time. You know, there's a Supreme Court case from years ago where the court held that accepting a pardon implicitly admits guilt for the offense which the pardon is granted. It's my speculation, but with all the money that Joe and Hunter received, millions of dollars from China, among others, it leads us to wonder if all these other family members were all involved in some way in getting a share of the millions.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I've done a lot of podcasting on this. If people are curious, the Alex Marlow Show is available wherever you get your podcasts. And I walked through all of the various crimes that I believe the Biden family has, if not committed, that we at least haven't gotten to the bottom of. But it's not a coincidence that they chose January the 1st, 2014 as the date, because that was right before the Biden family cut deals with Chinese companies, a Russian company, Ukrainian company. All these companies that are backed with the power and blessing of their various governments. This is clearly acting as agents of foreign governments, the fear of violations, not to mention Hunter Biden's art grift, which clearly was designed to get foreign governments to funnel money to the Biden family. And all of that's clear as day that was the case. No actual reputable art critic thought Hunter's art was any good. And yet he was selling prints for 5 and even 6-figure sums. All this was criminal. It was just a matter of time before it was going to get figured out. And this is an announcement to the world that Joe Biden's family is a crime family. And given what you just read, that is how the Supreme Court would look at it.
Well, President Trump made reference to the assassination attempt in Pennsylvania, and he said he believed it was God's blessing that allowed him to live for a very good reason. Listen to what he said.
Just a few months ago in a beautiful Pennsylvania field, an assassin's bullet ripped through my ear. But I felt then, and believe even more so now, that my life was saved for a reason. I was saved by God to make America great again.
Well, when he said it, a large part of the room stood up and cheered. But Joe Biden and Kamala Harris didn't stand and didn't even clap. Well, they may argue with the MAGA line, but how can anyone not cheer for someone who was nearly assassinated and thanked God for saving him?
A great question, and they should have stood and cheered. It's an interesting thing because Joe Biden always played to his Catholic faith and acted as though he was a man of faith, and yet he consistently undermined basic Judeo-Christian values throughout the course of administration, particularly with the pandering to the abortion industry nonstop. But there are other things as well that were deeply immoral, and he's a true liar. I spent so much time studying Joe Biden, and I concluded something about him that I don't believe I concluded about any other major Democrat politician that I've looked into, is that I'm convinced he's a bad person. He's not just a bad politician. I can't think of another Democrat that I would guarantee that that's the case. There are some I have my speculations, but I've concluded that, and that's a clear example of it. He should have stood up and cheered. He nearly died. He was almost shot and killed, and now his goal is to make America great again. And if you were a classy man, you would have stood up and cheered, and he couldn't. But who knows if he even remembered where he was at the time, Pastor.
Well, Alex, thank you for your commitment to telling the truth and for taking a few moments with us on the program. I hope you'll come back again.
Whenever you like. This is fun.
Absolutely. Well, I'll have some thoughts of my own about our potential for our future when we come back. Well, I have a question for you. Would you rather live in a nation of bad people with good laws or a nation of good people with bad laws? Well, the answer is pretty simple. Bad people will tear down good laws, but good people will work to repair bad laws. Now, I'm glad that bad laws are being undone by the new administration, but because the root of our problem is spiritual, our bigger goal should be to change people's hearts, not just change politicians. Well, in order to bring real and lasting change, we need more people with a heart for God. People who want to uphold godly principles and see them influence the world we live in. Jeremiah 24:7 says this, I'll give them a heart to know me, that I am the Lord, and they'll be my people, and I'll be their God, for they'll return to me with all their heart. We're going to need to do more than study and talk about religious doctrines. We're going to need to live out our faith in a way that introduces people to Jesus, but more than that, helps us live our faith out in a meaningful way. I remember very well those weeks and those days leading up to the election in November. There was a lot of anxiety amongst all of us. Well, I have a very similar sense of anxiety these days. There's a tendency to think that the people we've sent to Washington are going to fix our problems. Folks, we have to change. I want to give you a simple response that we can all walk towards. Let's read the Gospels together. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, 15 minutes a day. We can read through them in 60 days. Let's begin our year by intentionally turning our faces to God. It'll bring His blessing to you, to your home, and just perhaps to our nation. And with that, there's more reasons for hope than despair, I promise. Well, we'll be back in just a moment with your emails. Thank you for taking the time to share your emails with us. We always look forward to reading them. Susan A. in Pennsylvania, I watch Huckabee and Alan Jackson now every single evening. It occurred to me that since Mr. Huckabee will soon be Ambassador Huckabee and that TBN will have a 30-minute time slot to fill, that the perfect solution would be to make Alan Jackson now a 60-minute program. I realize that requires a great deal of work and preparation. However, your guests are so intelligent and thought-provoking and your questions so honest and straightforward, 30 minutes goes by much too quickly, always leaving me longing for more information. I don't know if this is possible, but I think if you and TBN would consider it, you'd be doing all of us a great and valuable service. Well, Susan, I appreciate your vote of confidence. We are having discussions. Doesn't look like it's going to happen immediately, but if you'll keep prompting us, maybe the Lord will open that door. And finally, from Donna Beckman, she said, I listen to the sermons and I read the books of Pastor. My question is, how are we as Christians supposed to react when we work with a person who's transgender? My work supervisors want us to call them a female, even though he was born a male. I don't believe that God wants us to encourage this sin. Please help me to understand the path I should take. It's a good question, Donna, and there's not really an easy answer. I think the general guidelines is to understand that when we go into the marketplace to work, we work with people that hold a whole variety of life views and ideologies. We may work with people who struggle with alcohol or people who practice immorality, from a biblical perspective at least. We treat all of those people with respect and dignity without encouraging them or affirming them in behaviors that ultimately lead to destruction. It's not easy, but I found that if I pray, the Lord usually gives me a pathway through that enables me to show respect without yielding my values. Thanks for watching our show. If you missed the live presentation, go to our YouTube channel. You can watch it there at your leisure. If you'll subscribe, it'll help others find it. Well, if you haven't yet, take a moment to send your emails to comments@alanjacksonnow.com. Your feedback and questions, they do a lot to shape our show. I'm Alan Jackson. Have a wonderful evening.